Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering Mage Errant Book 7, The Last Echo of the Lord of Bells. Chapters 67, 68, and 69. Nice. For Arthur, seize the means of destruction, LOL, and preparation and knowledge. In these chapters, well, Talia finally gets let off the leash. And, I mean, if you're out here impressing Ilinia, and she's like, yo, I didn't know you could do all of that, I feel like you're pretty scary. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everyone. I am Natasha. Thank you very much to Dan for commissioning this episode. Dan is here in the chat, not feeling too well, so everybody send Dan healing vibes. MX Shard and Eduardo are also here. Welcome. So these chapters are more battle. More battle, everybody. We have shifted in that everybody is focused on one enemy, so that mixes it up a little bit. But it is a lot of battle, again. However, I felt like I was more invested the whole time that I was listening. I didn't find my mind wandering like it has in some of the chapters because of it all being focused on a particular villain. And my only concern has been, and it turns out to kind of be like, unlikely that this is a real problem. My concern, especially with Talia's attack and how intense it seemed, was, oh my god, is Talia actually going to accidentally destroy a dragon head that has the book in it that we're worried about damaging because that will fuck things up? Because she does destroy a couple of dragons' heads, but it seems like that isn't really such a major concern. And there's a little bit of detail gone into a bit later about, like, even though she was able to do, like, some real damage, more than anybody else had done so far, she by no means could have accomplished this in a vacuum. Everybody else has softened Heliothrax up, so to speak, so that by the time she gets there, yeah, okay, she's able to pull this off, but Let's back up, though, for Arthur, because this is a really interesting approach that we have going on here. So, Godric has a copy of his own armor running in front of him in the vanguard. And we find out Arthur could not do this. Godric is doing it because he has, one, an amazing mind's eye that's just larger than average. And secondly, he has gravel. And he also has the pact with his friends. So all of this combined gives him a particular kind of advantage. And I do just want to mention the mind's eye thing. I don't know, how much this has been circulated, because I'll see things that that are sort of formatted as a meme. And I think you guys know what I mean. Like, it'll be just like a screenshot off Tumblr or something like that. And there was a really interesting study done about how few people, not how few, that's unfair phrasing, about the differences in the way people are able to imagine objects and see them in their mind's eye. And how some folks literally cannot do that. And I know I talked about this in the mind's eye section when we first find out about how some of this works, but I was genuinely startled to see in the comments below this post that somebody had made, a lot of people being like, wait, you guys can see it? you don't just sort of go, I remember that apples are red. You can see an apple in your head. And it was just a really interesting moment to me, because while I know that this is something not everybody can do, I was taken aback at how many people were making comments like that, as if they were only just now realizing what being able to picture something meant, and that they had been assuming we all were coming at this the same way, where picture a thing to them just meant recall the basics on what you know a thing looks like, which isn't really the same. And I just found that really, really interesting. And it's something that I have had a little bit of trouble with Owen, because I can picture things complete, like I that is part of, I think, why I'm good with so much visual art and whatnot. And not to say that you aren't good at visual art if you can't do that, because there are people I know who have been like straight up colorblind that do some of the most fantastic art because they're not limited by their understanding of color the way that I would be, you know. But I have had a lot of moments where like Owen and I are putting together something to decorate our living room or our bedroom, and we're like taking items that I'm saying this and this will really go together. And he will be like, will they? I don't really see that. And when I try and explain, like, well, remember how this has this color, this gilt edging, this shape, and he will look like he's really having a hard time imagining what I'm saying. And I'm beginning to think, I think that maybe he doesn't have that kind of mind's eye thing. And that's part of what's so limiting for putting together ideas like that, and trying to just imagine what something is going to look like, you know? Dan says, yeah, that meme made me realize I can't picture stuff in my head. I just remember them, but I can't see them. That is so fascinating. I'm really like, it's fascinating to me because I had no idea that there was a difference in the way people's minds worked in that kind of respect. And there's also, of course, the difficulty in explaining how you see things in your head. How much of what we think of as the difference between how our minds work is simply a difference in the way we explain how our minds work, because there's nothing to empirically show how our mind works. We can't just get hooked up to a television screen and everything happening in our head flashes across the screen. Like, that technology does not exist, so we have to rely on our, firsthand accounts of the way that things work for us in our minds. And how accurate are we when we try to explain that sort of thing? It's impossible to know something like that. So anyway, I just, this mind's eye thing, it just got me thinking about it, because it's just startling, especially getting into more about like being neurodivergent and how that all works. The difference in how our minds function is really being showcased a lot more in recent years. I feel like we're beginning to understand a lot more about it, and it makes me very hopeful for the future and the ways that we're going to be able to like get people the kinds of resources that will work best for them, so that more people can succeed in places that they haven't in the past. Or even, just even if it isn't more resources, more understanding and compassion, so that people aren't being berated or judged for the fact that they can't do a particular thing because we think they're just not trying hard enough, when the fact is they aren't capable of that thing. So anyway, this is the whole concept of this is just really, really interesting. So it says he fully integrated those illusion anchoring spell forms into his father's armor spell form, allowing an illusory copy of himself to pilot an entire second suit of armor, wielding his gravity hammer, while Godric himself wielded his Cometrian rune bow. And already I'm sort of like, really? That's interesting. You have the bow and it has the hammer. What's going on here? So Godric and Alustin's decoys were running behind their main defenses. Eden's ceramic tiles came first, drifting in a series of floating barriers. Now, I'm realizing that I may be, because I do get the names mixed up of some of the side characters. Eden winds up dead, right? He is one of the first, named characters in this section to get fried by Heliothrax, which was really startling. That was an unexpected, the whole way that this, you guys, this is really, really rough. But I'm getting ahead of myself. So Heliothrax's throat is inflating, and it's actually kind of helpful. She has her bonkers dragon flame, but she has a tell when she's about to use it, which, that I'll take it. To Godric's relief, she didn't target them, but Ilinia's storm body. As Heliothrax's throat contracted, dragon flame punched straight through the storm body's outer layer, then spread out through the whirling winds and water still burning. And Ilinia's not inside it, so, she's okay. Heliothrax had merely made Ilinia's storm body more powerful with the attack, and it would be a couple minutes before she could spit dragon flame again, and considerably longer until she could use her pressurized dragon breath. Ilinia's burning storm body promptly headbutted Heliothrax directly between the eyes, and I was just like, a headbutt. Man, that is so undignified. Amazing. I struggle here because so much of this is a battle and an attack that is set up, and then somebody, releases their power and a thing happens, and the temptation for me is always to just sort of read you exactly how this goes, because there isn't, in a lot of these cases, a shorter way to explain step by step how this went down without kind of yada yadaing a lot of it. But I also feel like I have to yada yada a lot of it, because otherwise I'm just literally reading you the book, which is not what this podcast is about, although you wouldn't know it from the number of people on YouTube who are very angry when they start listening that this is a podcast and not an audiobook that was illegally recorded. So they all unleash their power, the other 20 people that are with him. And we get the descriptions of every single person and the ways that they unload. And then there were a few spots on the Sunworm that avoided the destruction, most notably their target head, which was exactly where Sabé, Rose, Alustin, and Valia struck. They descended on the head, unleashing sword echoes, magically enhanced cutting paper, cuts from Rose's flame-propelled greatsword, and who knew what bizarre armor combination from Sabé, as they worked to hack apart the flesh tendrils holding the blue dragon's mouth shut. And, long story short, that shit does not work. This is where it says, oh no, it's Edmundson Dries is the first one to die. My bad. Because both their names start with an E, I think, and that's why I started to get a little bit confused about, Eden and Edmundson. So, again, when it says he was the first to die, I was just like, the phrasing of that is really well done. This is something that I have a strong response to, is when an author manages to instill an element of dread, but they don't drag it out too much, because it can be overplayed. This was something that I really liked when I was reading the Dark Tower series by Stephen King with Miles. I covered it with Miles for those interested in listening. It is a questionable series in a lot of ways. It has such great elements, and then he just really went off the rails. But there's a lot of a mention of he would regret doing that very shortly, that kind of thing. And I would really like that, putting in a factor of like, oh, well, now I'm aware that something very specific is going to go wrong here. And it didn't really give anything away, usually. The only thing that began to happen in that series was that he would say something that instilled that kind of dread, and then it would not pay off for chapters and chapters and chapters and chapters. And so it began to feel like it was just a little manipulative. But here, it's just an immediate payoff, which is part of what makes it so upsetting. Emerson Dries was the first to die, as a sunfire containment field flickered into existence around him. Heliothrix didn't even have to use that much mana to kill him. The lightning and solar mana she pumped into the containment field arced directly and violently to his steel spellform tattoos, melting them in the blink of an eye. Godric quickly looked away from the gruesome sight. And I was like, that is horrifying sounding. And we wind up finding out a little bit later that Dries was one of the few that really did some direct damage to Heliothrix, which is why she zeroed in on him in particular. But I just really, that is such a rough way to die, man. Oh my God. And it said they were hit by an explosion of barely structured magic, which Ilinia has warned them about. It wasn't enough. The shockwave of Edenslain and Hugh, like, trying to protect everybody with their wards and whatnot, it's not enough. The shockwave punched through both defenses in 100 places, then expanded outward into their group in chaotic tangles of lightning, fire, light, force, and more. One burst of magic might freeze and shatter everything in its path, while another might electrocute while crushing targets to the ground. At least half a dozen of their number died instantly. Most of them were among the librarians errant, though Celia the Anchor was the only one Godric knew by name, so they were red shirts, which is fine. I have no problem with that. We have the Emmonson's death, which is already upsetting enough. So at this point, they're just looking around at what damage they have managed to do with their assault, and Godric is straight up discouraged. They had done plenty of visible damage, but most of it seemed superficial, save for a nasty circular pit gouged in Heliothrix's side from Emerson Dries' assault. Heliothrix was still alive and enraged, and Ilinia's storm body had been entirely dispersed by the shockwave, which that sucks, because that was kind of key. Which makes sense later on when Ilinia is taken out, at least for the moment, why Heliothrix is basically like, well, now she's gone. You guys don't stand a chance in hell. So at this point, Godric starts to hit at Heliothrix, and he's attempting to draw her attention, but he's not managing to do it. He's doing lightning and rune arrows and whatnot. So he decides, you know what I'll do is scent magic. And I loved this. For a moment, she stops dead. And then she just exhales and starts laughing. And is like, oh, come on. Do you really think that you're the only one that's ever tried that? It says, I've long since put biological limiters on my senses, thresholds to stop them from being overloaded. Which is a really interesting way to put that. Basically, like, what we have seen him accomplish with his scent magic before is spontaneously getting people to double over and vomit in response to a horrible stench. And so the limiters that she has put in place, it's not like she doesn't smell, but it, I guess, keeps her from having that completely involuntary reaction, which I feel like I wouldn't mind having that kind of thing in place myself. We all have our particular things that we are really, really oversensitive to, I think. And for each of us, it's a very different thing. For me, scent can trigger migraines. So I would love to be able to just like make there be some sort of barrier that keeps certain scents from getting through. I also am really sensitive to sudden loud noises, like to the degree, and I'm not kidding. Owen had this weird thing with his phone, which he has since learned how to like change the settings in the car so this doesn't happen. But he would have his phone at a perfectly reasonable volume plugged in to listen to a podcast. And then somebody would call him and he had like a heavy metal phone ringtone. So it would go from like, and then they were blah, 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 and it would go like all the way up to the very top volume level out of nowhere as intensely as you can imagine with this like fucking electric guitar. And one time I was in the car with him and somebody called him and the ringtone went off so suddenly and startled me so badly that I literally burst into tears. And it was like the most absurd thing. I couldn't help it. It felt like I had been punched in the solar plexus. It was like that kind of reaction. So anyway, this, like, her being like, oh, I've got biological limiters on my senses. I was like, honestly, that sounds really dope, you know? And I know that sensory stuff is a big thing for a lot of people who are neurodivergent. And wouldn't it be great, you guys, if we could just, like, all wear whatever fabrics without feeling a way about it, or eat whatever food, no matter what the texture is, even though the taste is fine, the texture is always throwing us off, but maybe that doesn't matter anymore. That'd be great. I would request that, please. Special request from me. So, of course, Heliothrax then recognizes Godric and is like, oh, okay, are you here for revenge? Because I've been down this road before, and I'm always willing to give fools a chance. And he says, no, not revenge. And she's like, seems like you are. But honestly, your motives don't really matter. It's just the fact that you're attacking me. And she starts to just go after him. Godric focused on surviving. Enslane and Hugh both placed multiple rows of barriers in front of him, and Heliothrax's spell swarm punched through, barely slowing down. Barely was enough, though. Godric had just enough time to launch himself to the side with his force boots and wind magic, throwing an object from his storage tattoo as he did so straight at a nearby pile of rubble. One of the attraction and repulsion rune axes from Demetrius. If Godric had kept going in the same direction, he would have been annihilated by a sunfire ray. But halfway through his original leap, he pushed himself violently to one side by activating the repulsion rune, launching him away from this pile of rubble. Want to know the real reason I'm attacking you? Why is that? Not to avenge my father, but to honor him. How noble, Heliothrax started to say. For my father, Godric bellowed, then fused his suit to the stone of the ground. For Arthur, yelled back the other archmages, securing themselves in other ways. Right before the gravity hammer his armor decoy had been carrying detonated. Getting the armor decoy to Heliothrax had been his main goal all along. When the Sunworm had let loose her chaotic shockwave, he'd used immense amounts of stone and crystal mana to keep it from being blown away. When he had launched an assault on Heliothrax and started taunting her, it had been to keep her from noticing the illusion armor carrying his gravity hammer directly under her and toward her badly wounded leg. And when he yelled in honor of his father and the other archmages had yelled in honor back, that wasn't a spontaneous moment. That was the prearranged signal that Godric's gravity hammer was about to detonate and that everyone should retreat away from Heliothrax and anchor themselves in place somehow. So, it implodes. Talia activated the kinetic anchors in her 4 bracers the instant Godric yelled for Arthur, and she was still almost pulled into the resulting implosion. She felt like all her limbs were about to be yanked from their sockets as the gravity hammer's destruction tried to pull everything around it into its embrace, her torso most definitely included. And guys, I know that at this point, it's too late. It's a moot point. Anybody who didn't have magic, I think, was pretty much... they were evacuated from Havath before any of all this even began, right? But all I can think about is what it would be like to, everybody around you was like, oh, do what you can to anchor yourself in place. And you're just some poor fucking schmuck without magic or not super great magic, maybe you have some, but you're just not at the level. And how much of a bummer it would be to just be in the wrong place. The only reason Indris's unconscious body wasn't dragged towards it was that Scrathanax had positioned himself near her, outside of Heliothrax's defenses, and was shielding his mother with his own gravity magic. So Heliothrax resists a lot of it. But one of her legs is very close, and Talia hears it ripping and cracking as it this implosion yanks on it. The instant the implosion stopped, the explosion started. Godric had packed the inside of his decoy armor with every single alchemical explosive the Archmage force had, and they'd had a lot. Especially the librarian's Errant in their storage tattoos. To make things worse, there had been at least a few enchanted items caught in the gravity implosion, and the blast was tinged with a half-dozen different magical effects, though none so extreme as the gravity hammer implosion. The blast actually knocked Heliothrax's rear end a few feet into the air, and did horrific damage to her wounded leg. When she slammed back down into the ground, the wounded leg gave out completely, unable to support the sunworm's weight, and she almost collapsed to the ground. So, at this point, she loses her temper a little bit. And Talia is like, I'm feeling something, and she realizes that Heliothrax is going to attempt a solar flare and just burn them all alive. The Sunfire Dome slammed shut the hole Sabé had torn in it, and Ilinia had widened, offering no easy way back for Ilinia's new storm body. So they begin all creating defenses around them. And Talia is like, all right, well, the things that I have in mind are definitely not going to be enough. Talia leapt through the Stormward's crown, passing the closing ceramic tiles and out into the open. She rapidly assembled spell forms, filling up her mind's eye with them, and then some. So she creates all of these dream wasp swarms, and she unleashes them, not at Heliothrax, at the Sunfire Dome. It says Dreamfire and Starfire reacted explosively, so there was no reason to expect Dreamfire and Sunfire to behave differently. Talia noticed one major difference right away, though. Dreamfire and Sunfire reacted even more explosively. The blast as the Sunfire Dome destabilized completely threw Talia off her feet, damaging the ceramic dome around her allies, and completely collapsed the other two layers of Heliothrax's defensive dome. I was like, oh shit. And she stands up, Talia, and is laughing hysterically. And then she stops because she feels that the eye of Heliothrax is gone. And she's like, wait, why? And realizes Heliothrax has decided, I am not expending any more energy on that because I need it right now. And she uses it all on Talia. It says, the world lit up so bright that Talia's Scrimshaw ward had to entirely almost black out her view to protect her eyes from the obscenely massive sunfire ray Heliothrax fired straight through the chest of Ilinia's second storm body. And it disperses it, needless to say. And Heliothrax turns to Talia and is like, all right, so we're about to do this then. And Talia, I'm thinking, is going to be like, oh shit, I should have known better. She's just like, oh my God, I get to do my stuff. And you guys, I could not stop laughing. This is not the point, but a little bit later, it's mentioned that her friends have made a list of spells that she is not under any circumstances supposed to try. And she has named it the special occasion list instead of like the forbidden list, which I really appreciate a lot. That's the way to do it, honestly. You can't just take things entirely off the table. You've got to be like, only under certain circumstances, and admit that that may happen. Something like that might come up. But I'm getting ahead of myself because, like I said, that doesn't happen right here. So she can only boil the water from her water affinity. Every polluted drop of rain and every contaminated puddle within 300 feet of Heliothrax instantly boiled into superheated toxic steam. The steam alone would have been enough to wound the sunworm, but that much heat expansion in a small area at once produced a phreatic shockwave. You know what? I'm going to look up phreatic just real quick while we're here. Phreatic is a term used in hydrology to refer to aquifers, in speleology to refer to cave passages, and in volcanology to refer to a type of volcanic eruption. All right, Mr. Bierce, I'm going to need you to calm down a little bit. I get it. It's the appropriate word to use. But also, just calm down. Anyone else struck by that sort of explosion should have been severely injured. She had two advantages, her scrimshaw ward and her limnin adaptations. So, I don't know if you guys are noticing this, but this is sort of what I'm talking about in terms of the repetition in the way that things are done. Somebody does a spell, we are told how dangerous the thing is and the ways that it could have backfired, but then we're given a literal list. She had two things. First, and then second, were her things that kept her from being harmed. This also happened with Godric. You know, he was able to do something his father couldn't do for three reasons. The first one was, the second one was, and it just gets to be really, really dense and a little tedious. I understand so much why he feels like he wants to explain this, because it's all based in actual physical reactions. It's, you know, and so the fact that she can pull one thing off, I have no doubt that there are fans out there who do keep track and keep score and go, well, but how was she, you know, if we look at how this would actually have worked, and they push their glasses up, no shade, I'm literally wearing glasses, and go, that just doesn't seem like that would really work. I could really understand, as somebody who personally has a tendency to over-explain my position because I really want people to understand where I'm coming from, how you are just like, I'm going to anticipate folks pointing out the way that this might not work and give an explanation as to why it does work. I am just not somebody who keeps score in that kind of way. So for me, I don't need this, but I can understand how a certain type of reader would need it or at least appreciate it. For me, it's just too much. I believe you that this works, and I don't always need basically like a whiteboard with a diagram. You know what I'm saying? So at this point, Heliothrax is slammed into the ground and is whimpering in pain. Half her gorgeous glimmering scales were gone, and even her insanely tough flesh underneath was scalded bright red from the blast. Her prior injuries looked even worse, horribly disfigured further by the steam blast. which Talia eventually is like, she looks like a partially cooked chicken, which I was like, that is horrible. And I'm going to admit to you guys, whenever somebody is described as whimpering, I immediately start to feel bad for them. Like instantly. And I wish that I wasn't such a soft touch. You know what I was saying? But like, this is Heliothrix, who is doing something monstrous to all these dragons, and she's trying to kill all my friends. But as soon as it said she was whimpering in pain, I was like, oh. I just had this like reaction to it, you know? So then Talia, she's like, all right, next step. She reaches this like high altitude. She checked her new heat resistance belt and noted that not only had Hugh and Eden restored their defenses around her allies, but that somebody had wrapped him in an especially thick, powerful looking windshield. And she's guessing it's Ilinia. Then the sunworm seemed to notice the blue glow illuminating the battlefield and looked up. It was a slow, hesitant movement, and Talia smiled in triumph when she saw it. And I do appreciate that description, because you picture precisely what this is. Wait, what's going on? Oh no, slow look up. Like, you just see it, you know? Talia didn't know how much of the fear she saw in Heliothrix's eyes was for her, and how much might have been out of the impossible fear that Candoron might have returned, but oh, was it satisfying. And that hadn't occurred to me. The idea that seeing that blue light, it might be like, oh my god, is Candoron here? But I was like, oh, interesting. Yeah, that makes sense, having that reaction, actually. She intended to make sure all of the fear was for her. A burning wind rose up inside her storage tattoo, which shone into life around her mouth. And then the burning wind erupted from her storage tattoo, carrying with it bones. And we find out, like, it's literal tonnage of bones. And many of them are from monsters they met in the labyrinths and whatnot. But there's also, of course, the bones from Ataerg, Indris's mate, that she had requested and saved for this very special occasion. So, yeah, we get a lot of description of all of the types of bones. And then she sent every last fragment and shard, not holding anything back, and then flooded her bone mana into it. By the time the bone storm was smashed down into the sunworm by the gale of burning wind, it had grown until it probably weighed as much as a sand ship, glowing a malevolent red. Except for the dragon bone, which was just on fire instead of growing, but Talia wasn't complaining. And she detonates it, and, you know, she stops, like, using the kinetic anchor so that she doesn't get locked in place while this goes off, because that would likely have dismembered her. And is sighing happily as it blows up. She just made 3 of the biggest explosions of her life in mere minutes. Explosions that any archmage would have been absolutely delighted to call their own. If the entire continent wasn't driven mad by the alien superweapon, Talia wasn't sure it was even possible for her to have a better day than this, and she wasn't done yet. And then there's another explosion. She has managed to send the debris in every direction at her own enemies, which is just really rude. As Talia reached the top of her arc and started to descend, Heliothrix looked up once more, easily fixing on her location by her brilliant blue glow. Talia could feel Heliothrix gathering her solar mana, preparing to unleash raw destruction on her. Unfortunately for the sunworm, she didn't gather it quite fast enough. And this is when she brings out her special occasion list. You guys, there is a moment here where she just, I wouldn't even say considers, it occurs to her that she could detonate her own skeleton. And when I tell you, I was really ready to throw this book across the room metaphorically because I was listening to the audiobook. I am not kidding. But it's made pretty clear later, it hadn't been a real consideration. It was just, he describes it as an intrusive thought, which I liked. So she melts the rock under Heliothrax's less injured back foot, and it begins to sink in. And then she uses the special occasion spell. Her tattoos are glowing, and she mixes her dream and lightning mana together. Dream lightning. This is new to Heliothrax. It raced through the sunworm's body, but where normal lightning might have left tree branch scars like Sabe's, dream lightning left scars of actual tree branches, flesh transmuted into actual wood. The dream lightning trail crawled across the flesh of Heliothrax's face, barely missing one eye, then raced around the outside of her skull and down her neck, where the lightning climbed into the first 2 grafted dragon's heads it encountered. It was somewhat academic whether the lightning would have been enough to kill the 2 heads on its own, because the tree branches left it riddled throughout the 2 brains would have absolutely finished the job. But it was unquestionably a mercy. Their deaths also cut the sunworm off from 3 of her stolen magics: water, glass, and bronze. So, this was the point where I was sort of like, uh-oh, be careful there, Talia. But I believe that she's aiming as much as she can so that she doesn't hit the dragon head that they're after here. But yeah, this whole thing is so, unnerving. The whole approach here. The fact that Dream Lightning doesn't, Dream mana in general, it's unclear to me exactly how much control Talia has over how it manifests. She can use it as a weapon and intend it to be destructive, but the way it chooses to destroy kind of seems out of her hands to a point. And I find that really interesting and just want to know a little bit more about how that all works. If it's is she subconsciously, there are tree branch scars across Sabe's face. And that is how Talia has always thought of them, is like tree branches. So it manifests as actual tree branches because that's in Talia's subconscious. That's the way that I interpret this to work, but I'm not sure if that was just outright control that she had over it. I'm taking it as sort of not something that she necessarily intended to happen, though. So, and then let's see. The Dream Lightning didn't stop after it ran out of energy power, out of enough power to transmute flesh into wood. It dispersed out into Heliothrax's nervous system and the nervous system of her grafted dragon heads. The sunworm was immediately thrown into a seizure, flailing about with limbs capable of crushing a lesser dragon, as incoherent fragments of dreams rushed about through both her mind and her grafted ancillary minds. And I'm just sitting here this is insane what Talia is managing to do here. This is so high level, And she, meanwhile, is almost empty everywhere except for her steel mana reservoir. She'd essentially used all her magics as siege magics, which meant she'd need to spend weeks doing mana dexterity exercises to prevent any of her other affinities from joining her water magic as siege magic. As it stood, she was little more than an especially dangerous battle mage. And I know that we have talked about how magic becomes siege magic before, and I feel like I understand that a little bit better based on the way that you guys helped explain in the chat. But talking about it as a dexterity exercise, I thought was very helpful, and I understood a little bit better from that as well. Let's see. Dan says she kind of explained it back a few books ago, talking about dream mana crossing multiple axes of concepts, so it's kind of random. Oh, I think I remember that. Okay. I'm failing to bring it fully to mind, but yeah, I recall. because that was a difficult section for me to understand. So that's part of why I remember it, was I feel like we spent a little extra time on it because I was sort of like, wait, what? MX Shard says, I've been assuming it's dream logic nonsense that sometimes correlates with prompting and associations. Yeah. Which it sounds like, the crossing multiple axes of concepts, that is the same thing really, as dream logic. It's just it's almost like trying to make it sound more precise when it's not really. It's making it sound like, oh, it's more scientific, but it's still sort of, instinct almost. So at this point, Heliothrax is getting back to her feet, and I'm just like, are you kidding me? Like, she has just taken so much damage. Her health bar must be completely off the chain. That is insanity. It would be hours or days before Heliothrax would be able to heal herself back to full health, but the Sunworm had faced worse, had healed from worse. And later on we find out that she can survive if only 25% of her body remains. However, despite all of this, Talia is really proud of herself. She's like, look, I get it. I'm not near her level. They've warmed her up for me and worn her down a lot. However, I managed to take out a couple of the dragon heads, and that is pretty fucking dope. So at this point, she says, you've irked me. And I really did enjoy irk. Just like, God, you're annoying, Her gaze drifted back over her shoulder, the wood of her dream lightning scars cracking and breaking with the motion, and her eyes settled on the two dead grafted dragons. Nonetheless, you have cost me dearly, insect. You will pay for that. And I rather suspect you've played out all your cards. And this is when Talia is like, oh, you think so? And she thinks about her skeleton, and I was just like, Talia. But she manages to be like, no, I'm not probably killing literally everybody that I care about just to take this one monster out. I love this. If you still had anything left, you'd still be attacking me. And Talia, I love this. Midway through the Sunworm's little speech, Talia jerked her body a few inches forward and stomped. The exact motion countless schoolyard bullies had made to intimidate their victims on countless worlds. And Heliothrax, the Sunworm, the bringer of justice, the queen of dawn, bearer of 1,000 gloried titles over long centuries, did something entirely unbefitting of those titles. She flinched. Just slightly, but from a creature so huge, even a slight flinch was a massive motion. And I love that. Heliothrax then tries to be like, what? I didn't flinch. What? And she then channels the last of her bone mana into her bracers. The dragon bone blades set above her wrist shot out, then ignited into flames. Heliothrax growled, regaining more of her composure, then reared her head back, preparing to breathe dragon flame all over Talia. Before she could, one of her affinity senses went mad, and it's water. And you'll recall, earlier, Heliothrax's water affinity was destroyed because of the dragon head that was killed. So I am not sure, and I'm it doesn't really matter either way, but I'm trying to tell whether or not I'm supposed to think this or not, because I don't remember. You guys, is Ilinia aware of the fact that it's her water affinity that is damaged and gone? Like, how do you tell the kinds of affinities that are associated with specific dragon heads? I don't remember if it is described the way in which people are able to tell what kind of affinities other mages have, if they can do that right away or if they have to be told what they are or what. Because like nobody can, well, I'm saying nobody. I feel like it's been described that there's like one particular being who can see people's mana reservoirs and thus they can tell, but I don't remember who it was. Sorry, Dan says they don't, I think it's mostly what magic the head is spitting out or if someone recognizes the dragon. Okay. MX Shard says, my assumption was that certain spells stopped happening in her constant onslaught. Okay. Yeah, I just couldn't remember if there's like, you know, a means of detecting what people's affinities are, right? Like obviously when they're still kids, there isn't an easy way. And that's why people have all these different tests to figure it out. And some people go a long time without realizing what it actually is that they have affinity for, because it's like an uncommon substance or whatever. But just was wondering about that. Dan says also it was cats that could see magic reservoirs. Okay, thank you. So Ilinia smashes her in an orb of water, which she works on with lightning as things continue. And she tells Talia, welcome to being a great power. So then we go to chapter 69, nice. And Ilinia she's basically like, all right, and rolling up her sleeves like, let's fucking do this, you know. And I am running out of time here, so I can't completely get into every detail of this, but it turns out that when lightning strikes water, it turns into a couple of different gases that are very, very volatile. And so that's part of what she's doing here with the lightning striking this ball of water. And as she's doing this, Ilinia is like monologuing a little bit and says that the most like powerful source I'm just realizing that it says, do you know what the most powerful source of power on our world is? I feel like there has to be a better way to say that. It's not magic, not brute strength, bureaucracy, or wealth. It's knowledge and preparation. My family has spent generations preparing to face foes like you. And later on, like, Heliothrix kind of throws this in her face and is like, your fucking sitting chatting gave me a lot of time to prepare also. So, you know, maybe think about that. You got greedy, started seeking power without being worthy and ready to use it. And it just emphasizes a lot about how everybody in her family trains and trains and trains. And Heliothrix has not done that. She barely manages to grasp one affinity, and then she moves on to, like, you know, acquiring another one. So she creates this gas, and let's see. Then she cast a simple lightning bolt, no more powerful than that of a barely trained apprentice at Heliothrix. The instant the lightning passed through the windshield, all the gases ignited at once. Ilinia could only hold the explosion for a few heartbeats before she had to start venting flames out of the top of the windshield. But during that time, Heliothrix was battered with more destructive force than all of Talia's spells combined, with more fire than any of Sarkis Vai's spells. And Talia, needless to say, is watching this with an expression on her face that I can only imagine is akin to a child opening presents on Christmas morning, like, you know, and is cackling. And this is when Heliothrix is like, oh, I agree with you. And then she releases another one of those shock waves. Ilinia realized to her horror that the clan cast as flame mages inside her shields were shouting in panic. And there, as the blast cleared, was Heliothrix, sheathed in fire, not burning, but safely armored in flame, using her stolen flame magic. Heliothrax made 3 moves in short order then, and Ilinia desperately responded to each. A wave of gravity to crush Ilinia against the ground. And let's see, a wind entirely of toxic gases. And to bring all of the flame hammering down on Ilinia from above. And she is able to block the first 2. The third, she tries to block, but she's still recovering. It wasn't enough. The only thing Ilinia managed to accomplish before the flame struck her was shoving Talia far away from her with a gust of wind. And Talia's mother is like interfering from the sidelines, trying to help Ilinia, and she isn't entirely sure whether she is able to save her or not. So I think she's likely still alive, but, you know, I don't know how badly injured she is. And it's just a real bad time, you know, like Ilinia has been their cornerstone, really, along with Indris. And now both of them have been, at least for the moment, taken out of play. This is really bad. So Alustin. At an organized and all-out assault, the instant you have Heliothrax's attention will try for the resonator one last time. I don't need you to tell me the obvious, traitor, Eden Slane snapped, and then closed the connection from his end. To which Alustin's just like, well, fair. So, they head in, and here comes the hit from Heliothrax's tail, which Alustin does not see coming. Valia does. And she manages to shove Alustin aside, but in protecting him, does not protect herself. And she is killed instantly. And Alustin is totally, like, obliterated in this moment. There's just a feeling of just dissociation, utterly. He isn't hearing what's going on around him. He's looking at her and it's like not processing why she would save him. Like all of this. And guys, there is this moment that I genuinely got choked up. He's looking at her and he's like, this is not how it's supposed to go. And it says that he like bends over and picks something up off the ground. And it's a Helicotin saber, and so now he has 2, and I'm thinking, oh shit. One of those sabers had spent decades pacted to a Havathi warlock, had grown, to his surprise, intelligent enough to recognize him, and to his bewilderment and pain, it recognized him as a friend the instant his hand closed around its hilt. You guys, I got so choked up. The idea, because we saw this happen, right? When we were in Valia's POV and she was so annoyed because her blade sees Alustin and is like, hey, buddy. Like she can tell that's the way it's reacting. And she's just like, dude, seriously? And at that time, it was funny, you know? It was just sort of like her being frustrated and trying to be tough and her blade just totally undermining that. But in a way, telling the truth. In a fundamental sense about how she still felt about Alustin in some ways. And then the way it reacts here and Alustin not being prepared. I don't know what he thought he was going to get when he picked it up, but you know it wasn't that. And how much worse that is. Knowing that like she just gave her life and her blade is reacting in this way. And he just didn't fucking comprehend how genuinely she cared about him and was trying to help. And he just doesn't have that kind of capacity in himself. So he doesn't recognize the truth of it in other people. And that's fundamentally where a lot of this sort of like with different people not believing in what they're told by those who mean it. It will come from a place of them not having the capacity to feel or do what it is this other person is describing. And so they simply cannot believe it because it doesn't make any sense. And this got to me, guys. It got me so bad. And like, we find out later that the whole thing with like carrying 2 blades is a big no-no. They have said many times, don't try and wield 2 because nobody can manage all those echoes. And as far as Alustin's concerned, oh well, I guess I'll die. Like, he is so out of his mind at this point. It is just a foregone conclusion. He is going to fuck some shit up. And he does not care what happens to him. That's like the furthest thing from his own mind. So now that I'm over time, I have to go into Candoron's POV again. It's really funny. She's like destroying different things that were going to be attached to her demesne. And this is an extra spatial oven designed specifically for roasting dragons. She had taken special care with the taste enchantments for her demesne. But it was hard to believe she'd spent months constructing something so unnecessary. I do really enjoy that. That is hilarious. Like, I mean, look, I get it. It seems frivolous, but also you are so old. You have time for some frivolous shit. Like, I'm not mad at you for it, you know? And this is going to be a place you live forever. Making it exactly how you want it to be, I cannot blame you. I can't tell you guys, if I were going to be creating a demesne, how long it would take, because I want everything just so, and I have a terrible time making decisions and committing to like one of 2 things. It's awful. I am very much Cheaty from The Good Place in that respect. So this I just really understood. So finally, the crystal sphere that she has been recovering inside uncurls. Where once there had been flesh adorned with crystal wings, now there was only crystal without flesh. Now there was a glimmering, faceted ether crystal giant with bottomless blue depths. The only thing that hadn't changed were her wings. And she yawns and stretches and then explodes into motion. She flickered downward through one of her planar tunnels, riddling Skyhold, leaving witnesses bewildered. And witnesses there were. No mages. No, Candoron was watched by other stranger witnesses that had been keeping vigil. And these are all of the creatures that we know. The Liar, the Wanderer, Tetragnath, multiple bodies. And one other being, a highly perplexed sandrake who had been eating a rat just on the other side of the directional gradient. The sandrake shrugged its wings and went back to its rat. And that's the end of the chapter. So, yeah, a lot of really, really curious how this is going to end up. If Candoron is going to ultimately save the day, or if she arrives and things are kind of managed by the time she gets there, or what? Like, I don't know. I'm trying to think what he could do to like really throw me for a loop, and maybe having it so that Candoron doesn't actually reach them, but I don't see that happening. I don't know. I really don't. But we'll see. All right, everybody. Thank you so much for listening. Until next time, toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.